going to be a interesting input for the placemaking as well.
Yeah, no, this is very exciting for us to get to connect with people from all over.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I should be officially starting this webinar. Well, I would like to welcome everybody to our first public space talk series organized by Eastern Mediterranean University Urban Research and Development Center. For the ones who don't know, EMU is located in the northern part of Cyprus, and it is the biggest university on the island, I can say, with about 14,000 students from more than 100 countries in the world. Our research center, operating since 1999, aims to improve the understanding of and deliver innovative responses to urban challenges by providing a forum of contributions to the quality of urban environment to promote sustainable urban settlements. And we are somehow committed to serving Cyprus and also the region. And we follow our mission by stimulating research into urban and regional issues or urban design. And we work with different parties within Cyprus and also with international collaboration. Of course, when the concepts such as urban health and inhabitant health will become prominent, can I ask you to mute your microphones, please? When all these issues of urban health especially have become prominent due to COVID-19, we believe that we have to revisit the future of our cities and our living environments. And of course, we need to do it in a different way than we used to. So everyone is repeating that the future will never be the same as before. Of course, we are hoping that this period of don't go out and stay at home except for urgent needs, this period is going to end sooner or later, hopefully quickly everywhere in the world. However, we will always have different threats like the pandemic that we are facing today. Therefore, creating solutions, facilitating social distance in our cities and public spaces against pandemic today and in future, transforming our streets and city spaces more pedestrian, bicycle-friendly, walkable places are all crucial for us for the short-term processes as well as long-term processes in our cities. So with these ideas in mind, as Urban Research and Development Center of EMU, we decided to organize a number of public space talks, and this is our first of the series. And I would like to thank Ethan Kent, who has kindly accepted our invitation to be our first speaker in this series. He is, as most of you might know or you may have seen in our posters, he is the Executive Director of Placemaking X, which is a global network. He works to support public space organizations, projects, and leaderships around the world to build a global placemaking movement, basically. He has been traveling for this purpose to promote placemaking and Placemaking X network and to accelerate placemaking leadership and impact globally. And he has been working on placemaking projects and campaigns, not only under Placemaking X, but beforehand he was working for Project for Public Spaces, most of you will know. So he will be talking about place-led development as a paradigm shift for urbanization today for us. So on behalf of our university and our center, I would like to thank once more to Ethan, and I will leave the screen, not the platform, to Ethan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Şebnem, for that beautiful introduction. Thanks for including me in this conversation. I really am looking forward to hearing from people your questions, what the challenges you're dealing with are around public spaces. This is a really important time to think deeply, to think bigger about these issues, and to really connect globally, to learn from each other. It's I think we're all we're all facing big challenges in different ways, but we also are realizing how much we all have in common. We've all retreated perhaps a little bit from our communities, but I think we also appreciate even more what our places, our public realm means to us, how it's created the memories, the relationships, the culture that we value most in our communities. And now I think we're starting to care more about local, and what does that mean for how do we return? But we also see our interconnection even more. We see how we're all very much the same, how we have similar needs and issues, how we impact each other globally, and how we need to come out of this in a more cohesive effort, and certainly a shared learning, globally. So I think we need to make this crisis help us connect us both deeper locally and globally in new ways. So the focus on place and placemaking, we think it could be a conversation for facilitating really the systemic change that's necessary to come out of this with. There's a big risk that we just come out of this and go back to either the old normal or much worse, unless we do this consciously. We're missing a big opportunity. So I'm gonna so please ask questions in the chat, and Şebnem is going to ask them at the end. So I'm looking forward to that part, but I'm going to go to a presentation. Let's see if I share my screen. Share. I'm just trying to figure. I did this before.
Yeah, it's that rectangular box with an arrow in it.
Right. Share screen. Okay, there. Just oops.
Yeah, we see your desktop.
Is that? And do you see the?
Yes, that's fine.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to talk about how a focus on place can shift our development, urban design focus coming out of this crisis. How this can be a paradigm shift that facilitates change in how we participate in our communities, how we govern, how we develop, design, how we work as different disciplines and collaborate in deeper ways. And so place-led development, leading with the shared values of a community expressed in the public realm, we think can really turn upside down the way we shape our cities. We have recently formed and launched Placemaking X, really in less than the last year, to really highlight, amplify, and support people learning about place-led development, about public space-led development globally. And we're finding incredible wisdom, success, and interest in every corner of the world to figure out how to collaborate more, how to sort of get back to what matters most to us in our communities. So the placemaking movement, I'll go more into the history of it, but it's really, it's really based on local expertise and appreciating that, supporting it, drawing it out further, and informing it through global networks as well. So we found that right now there's a divergence of causes often around place, that we've forgotten about place. Even the most progressive wings of different disciplines are focused on a narrower solution set. and sometimes actually inadvertently degrading uh, the place context, the shared value of the public realm. If we're just focusing on an art object or a technological solution, or a narrow approach to economic development, we can actually, even if it's well intended and maybe measurably successful within its own metrics, it can be limiting or degrading a shared value of place. But we're also seeing from many different disciplines, sectors, uh, and movements a focus on how coming to creating great places, great public spaces can more fundamentally address their goals and support collaboration um, and creativity in new ways. In fact, we're seeing how this convergence around place builds new systems of governance, development, financing that enables the changes that are necessary. So as we take a step back, in quarantine and in the isolation that we're all in, it's a really important time to think about what kind of cities do we want, because cities inevitably are going to change quite significantly coming out of this process. And if we come back and all just go back in our cars and continue to live more private lives, we are taking a big step back in sustainability and equality and economic development and health issues. Right now, if you Google the future of cities, a lot of the images look a lot like this. And this is an image that has been sort of put into our heads, into our imaginations as what a sustainable or equitable or healthy future would be like. But I contend that it's actually one that is not about place. This is about objects. It's about technology. It's about free-flowing movement. It's about a narrow definition of mobility. But it's actually not one that creates the equality, the sustainability, the economic vitality that we need. And so we think this vision is really one that's led by narrow solution sets and narrow goals of discipline. So as an example, if you lead with design and development, I think you get more design development. We don't just need more design, more development. We need a deeper challenge to draw out the best of designers and developers. This is a picture I took in the Guggenheim Bilbao in Spain. This building represented the success of, or the perceived success of, how architecture can draw attention to a city and draw tourism. But I also talked to people in Bilbao that said that it was a distraction from what the life and culture of what the city's about. And moments after I took this picture, these two men actually mugged a tourist couple of their camera right here. And I told police, and they said it happened right in this spot all the time. It's designed perfectly. The blank walls, the way this building is about itself, not about the place, not about the public space, creates this environment that's not safe, that's not very healthy, and that's not really about local culture and identity. But the same with cars and traffic. Each discipline is making these mistakes. We're planning for a narrow set of outcomes with a narrow set of solutions. If you plan for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. This is in Havana too. It's part of the world there's fewer cars, but that is greatly threatened because cars are still allowed to take over the streets. And this is as we come out of the COVID crisis. It's wonderful how there's been many fewer cars in many of our streets. In my neighborhood in Brooklyn has never been so quiet, and the air's never been so clean. Yet the cars that are there going faster, and there are a lot of people talking about buying cars now because they don't feel like they can take transit. So how do we repurpose the street space is a big question. Certainly the U.S. has been defined, its culture, its identity, its public spaces have been defined by a privatization of the public realm, by the storage and movement of automobiles. That story has been powerful in New York City too. And Times Square was a public space that was defined by cars and traffic, that's advertising, its movement. But we led a campaign called the New York City Streets Renaissance Campaign to transform this and streets around the city, that was very successful. And it wasn't about being against the cars, but being for people and places. and showing that we could do this with temporary measures and experiments, not necessarily big, expensive designs or permanent changes. And in this case, the nice chairs didn't come to Times Square in time, so they had to go to the hardware store and buy these temporary, beach chairs. And the informality of it, the simplicity of it was actually all the more powerful. And people debated it, but the debate around what Times Square chairs should look like was a healthy one. So in a way, our public spaces around the world, even in the most formal, wealthy parts of the world, actually need more informality. They need people to feel like they can shape them again, that they're important, that it's about them, not just about the space or the form. So a strong example of the success of this idea has been in Nairobi. There's a broad network from different sectors of advocates for public space and practitioners in the downtown, in this case here, but also in some of the informal communities. And they've demonstrated through a series of placemaking weeks where they temporarily closed some of the main streets in the city and had conversations and conferences and parties. That streets can have different purposes. These are streets that are very much clogged by traffic much of the time. So they had these successive placemaking week activations and events that continued to inform and inspire what these streets could become. But it actually it built the political capital and the technical capacity to come up with a better design and remove cars for the most part from the street, moving it to one lane, one way. So this is the before and the after in this space. And so some of them are more community-led, some are more city-led, some of the solutions, parts of these placemaking campaigns, citywide campaigns are more bottom-up. This is, I think, in Dandora, where the community is reclaiming spaces and improving them. But the city we've actually worked the most in when I was at Project for Public Spaces was Detroit. And in a way, there's a similar narrative going on there, is that people that have lived in Detroit a long time or people that are moving there not because it's a more livable or because it has better public spaces than other cities, but because there's this feeling that you can help shape it, and that you can help create it. And there's good frictions and debate about who the spaces belong to and who gets to shape it, and there's real issues of equity involved there. But to agree, they also drive further interest and dynamism in these spaces. So this is the central square of Detroit called Campus Martius, where a $20 million investment attracted billions of dollars investment in the blocks right around it. And it was in a space that was formerly defined just by cars and traffic, and now is a space you drive to, not through. But it's the informality of this. We helped create this beach, this temporary space that really allows people to slow down, connect, feel welcome, and in a way that creates a heart to their community. It's about public space and people first and foremost. Another space we worked on in the center of Mexico City, in Parque Mexico, in Condesa, was a space. Again, it was about creating a gathering place, but it was the most important part of the placemaking process is how it builds the social connections, the social capital, the capacity to manage and improve a space and work together, make some mistakes, learn from each other. This space was also a place of gathering after the earthquake that occurred there. So the social connections build the resilience from all kinds of disasters in spaces. So it's about the people first. It's not about the product. We often copy the form of great public spaces, the Italian piazzas around the world, and there's a lot to learn from the form, but we often forget to copy the process through which they're created, the informal and formal management and governance models, how they're financed informally and informally. And certainly a place like Piazza del Campo in Siena here, it's the informality that occurs as you move further into the space. The activity, the social life becomes more and more relaxed, fun, informal. People become invited into that space, and it's the life that makes the space work. The design is actually rather simple, but there's so many layers of purpose and meaning for locals, for tourists in this space, and for the most part, those are additive. They add to each other's experience. In great public spaces, we all raise our level of behavior to contribute to each other's experience. It's a big challenge in a lot of over-touristed areas where tourists are allowed to dominate a space. But in the best public spaces, they're designed first and foremost for locals, and tourists like them all the more. So as we, again, reinvent tourism coming out of the COVID crisis, we have to look at placemaking, not just marketing places to consume as tourists in an extractive way, but improve them for and by locals first and foremost, and invite tourists back in to contribute, to spend money and time in ways that add to the local identity, and to be placemakers themselves. So we're seeing this evolution of the development paradigm from what we call project-driven to place-led. So project-driven development has important values. There's an efficiency to it. Let's build the infrastructure, the roads, the parks, the squares, the buildings, and let's just build them quickly and affordably and efficiently. Discipline-led, it often gets better outcomes. Let's get the best experts, design it more beautifully, more cleverly, more with higher quality materials, higher quality design. Better than that, we see as place sensitive, where experts start to listen to communities, to each other, work across disciplines, respond to culture, context, community, history, sustainability issues. But we think there needs to be a further paradigm shift to place-led, where the goal is to build the capacity of communities to improve their own public realm, and to make place a shared goal, not just applying the disciplines sensitively to place. So what does that mean? It's quite common sense, actually. We look around the places in the world that are most loved, that we care about the most, and they were informally created through a place-led approach, where people were very resourceful. They were all working together to almost compete to contribute to the shared value of that public realm. The way main streets work, the way the storefronts, the store owners, the buildings, all designed to give love to the public realm. But much of the dominant development paradigm around the world is very project-driven. It's let's build a building that is about itself, that takes footfall, that takes attention, that just serves single functions, that roads that serve single functions, stores that just try to suck people in, rather than add to the street as a shared value. But the other fear often in doing project-led or design-driven development is often in fear of no organization to cities, to development, to sort of thoughtless, passive change within communities. So we control because we fear some kind of chaos. But really, the most loved places, the most successful places, allow some kind of emergent chaos. They allow people and support healthy tensions, healthy chaos, creativity, but they facilitate change. You don't know what's going to end up in these spaces, but it's more about an unfolding story, a process of continually evolving, debating, experimenting with how spaces can be improved. So placemaking is a term that we started using in the late 90s to articulate this more community-led, community-based approach to drawing out the success of a community with and by them. No longer just engaging communities as experts and coming up with a solution to them, but drawing on their expertise and building it out further. So there's lots of definitions of it, and part of the placemaking process, honestly, is to debate what placemaking is and who does it. But one definition is it's a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize shared value. There was an MIT study that found that the biggest benefit of placemaking isn't just the improved place, but the built capacity and shared social connections through that process. So it's also about strengthening the connection between people and the places they share. So it's the process, even if you know exactly what a space needs to be like, the process is key. Placemaking is a process. So the placemaking movement has also been a process of learning, and we're trying to get the movement to reflect a lot of these values of continuing to build and build on the past expertise, draw on many different disciplines and sectors, but grow at many scales as well. So it really has roots in many great urban thinkers like Jane Jacobs and William White, who were mentors of my father, who worked with Holly White on the Street Life Project, and then in 1975 my father founded the Project for Public Spaces, and a lot of that work was more user analysis. It was the first 20 years or so were observing how people use spaces and then coming up with solutions, recommendations based on that. So a very place-sensitive approach. But in the late 90s, we started to switch to a more place-led approach, where it was engaging the community as experts, as observers of space, and how they can shape it and grow spaces themselves. So we started to thinking about placemaking as a global movement, as a really way to shift sort of a new environmentalism in the early 2000s. And my father had also organized the first Earth Day in 1970, and I grew up around a lot of the founders of the environmental movement. And we've all long seen placemaking as a way to bring new partners to environmentalism, but also give environmentalism a more proactive, collaborative approach to drawing in many solutions and sectors to environmental sustainability goals. So we officially launched the placemaking movement in 2013 with an international network that we've since seen start to self-organize. And that's why we needed to start Placemaking X, to start to connect all these regional networks, placemaking experts around the world to amplify and highlight their work, to draw on the expertise of the placemaking community that has emerged globally. And it's really in every community, but often people find they often feel alone or disconnected. So there's been a real, the most fun part is just connecting all these people to learn from each other and highlight each other's work. So we launched it last June in Valencia at the Placemaking Europe week there, and it's really the ethos behind it was set by Cecilia Martinez, who's a board member of Project for Public Spaces and was head of UN Habitat in New York and for Latin America before that. And she said, we're creating a global movement to shape spaces into places. And we think of places as spaces with purpose and meaning. So to give more purpose and meaning to space. So the mission of Placemaking X is to be a global network of leaders who together will accelerate placemaking as a way to create healthy, inclusive, and beloved communities. And so we're encouraging people to sign up on the website as advocates, and we're connecting people locally, but also globally around shared issues and of common passion, of common expertise and research. And we're looking to highlight the successes and stories of people everywhere. So, but the movement's really built on a set of conferences that we've been a part of organizing in many corners of the world, and there's many more than these, especially in the recent year. But each of these conferences on the event part of our website, there's reports from these conferences that show the learning, the network building that has occurred, and how we want to continue to build on the wealth of these conversations. The vision of Placemaking X is to make the spaces we live into places we love, to create a thriving, equitable, and sustainable world through the convergence of values, passion, and action around our public spaces. This keeps growing since we've made this in June, but these were the initial leaders and advocates that helped launch Placemaking X. Placemaking is a word we kind of made up, but it's being used even in other languages now in a way that's fairly common. It has different meanings in different parts of the world. There's different strength to how people use it, but globally, it's actually rather balanced. Some parts of the world it's more discipline-led, and some or more about the experts. Some parts of the world it's more about grassroots-driven action. Sometimes it's more government. But collectively, globally, it's being balanced out, and we want to make sure no sector, no discipline No one demographic really dominates the shaping of placemaking or locally or the movement globally. So my father, when we launched the movement, said that everyone has the right to live in a great place. More importantly, everyone has the right to contribute to making the place where they already live great. So this right to contribute is key. It's not just about providing great places for people and livability. It's achieving lovability through challenging and supporting everyone to help co-create their spaces. So that co-creation is key, and it's really we've found the most important innovation that's emerging around placemaking is around governance. And the greatest limiting factor for most public spaces is how it's governed and managed. The perception has been that it's just a design solution. Design is important, but it becomes possible and more important within a context of a management and governance strategy. So most governments are defined around different silos, different sectors, and we need to, whether it's the tourism department, as I said, often has a narrow solution set of just marketing a place. The police department's dealing with just a problem-focused approach. Parks are isolated in their silo. Transit, each of these sectors has a narrow set of solutions. Connecting them through place management organizations, through placemaking processes, creates more collaboration, creates a more place-sensitive approach, and draws on their various resources, expertise, ideas, and creates some more efficiency. But where we think we actually want to move towards is a place-led governance that is more about district, neighborhood, Main Street governance, in some degrees devolving governance to that scale, to then draw on the creativity of those departments, but also challenge the community to lead and take responsibility at that scale. So we think we consider reinvent democracy and governance, and it's being reinvented from the place level, from the district level up. In an era where national leadership is not doing as well around the world, cities are leading, and that's wonderful. But we really think the future of cities is in its districts and neighborhoods and destinations, and how they are governed is how we can reinvent how we participate in our cities. And certainly as we come out of COVID, we need, participating in reshaping our streets is the way to reinvent our governance and our participation. Disciplines also are in their silos. We plan streets, parks, squares, libraries, each within our own discipline, and each of these projects are isolated. Placemaking can draw them out, can turn them inside out a little bit, can look at how they each have placemaking, place management skills, resources, creativity. But eventually we want to start to look at all of our public realm, all of our public space investments as how they can become multi-use destinations, how they can be hubs of activity, how they can become great places first and foremost, supported by libraries, transit, streets, markets, squares, parks, as well. So really turning upside down the shaping of cities to look at destinations to go to, not through, that can have many layers of purpose and meaning in these spaces. So, yeah, the disciplines as well. So just starting to wrap up, some strategies for, we're seeing placemaking campaigns, like I mentioned in Nairobi, like what we led in New York City that led to the Public Plaza program there, and there's new campaigns now to really reinvent the public space management in neighborhoods as well. We're seeing placemaking, whether it's in front of your street in your community, citywide, regionally, or globally. We need to make sure placemaking campaigns advocate for systemic change. They're not just for better places alone. We need to be telling everybody stories. We need to show how that we're all not alone. We're not just doing one-off events in our communities. And then we need to be making this about actual impact too. So we need to connect the big thinking, the culture change, the systemic governance change, with lots of short-term actions in our public spaces, in our streets, in our squares. And a framework for this we call is the power of 10. We think a great place needs at least 10 reasons to be in it. So it's the purposes in that space that are key. and it can be very inexpensive, informal, a place to sit, some shade, a place to, some signage, a place to wash your hands perhaps right now. But a great destination needs at least 10 places, each with 10 things to do in it. So a great square, a great main street, a great waterfront. It's about these places with the layering of things to do in them. A great city needs at least 10 destinations. For a great country, perhaps, or for Cyprus to be a great place that people love and keep investing in ways that add to its shared value. It needs 10 great place-led cities or regions within it, and continents. That's what we're getting these. We have 14 now placemaking regional networks that are trying to embody this and highlight their successes. Placemaking Europe is one of them that I encourage you to get involved with. They have really strong networks that are focused on a whole range of issues, from place-led development to tourism to health and equity. There's been a series of conferences. We launched Placemaking Europe during our Placemaking Week in 2017 in Amsterdam. There's been one in Stockholm or in Valencia. And then this year, there's going to be a big one that will be announced soon in early October that will be quite global. Also for near your region, there's the sort of Middle East, North Africa, and sort of Arab placemaking is this network they've called themselves the Amakin Network, and we launched that in Abu Dhabi in February at the World Urban Forum. So I encourage you to check that out. One event, there's many placemaking events coming up this year. One coming up very soon we're excited about is called Porch Placemaking, where it's encouraging people to come back out of their homes and contribute to shared public spaces in new ways, and to tell those stories and highlight it, and to create collective declarations of how they're going to come back and use public space differently, how they're going to create a new bold vision for their public realm, and change things systemically. So I encourage you to share your experiences with us on the Placemaking X website, and join as an advocate. Be part of our many social media channels, and participate in the conversations that way. I'm not going to go into this, but also our sister organization is called the Social Life Project that my father runs. And he's created recently an article on opportunities for creating a new normal, and how to build back stronger in public spaces, with many great images, and we can go through some of those. But I'd love to stop and take some questions, and we can go into more of this through a conversation if that works for you all.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we already have one long question. Would you like me to read it, or can you read it in the chat box?
Let's see which.
Yeah, it's the last one. Is it a student in EMU?
Okay.
Everyone can read. I can read it for the ones who are.
Maybe read it for everybody.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So our participant says that the Earth is taking a break right now from the human activities, and such a good idea of enhancing the health and sustainability in the cities for a better life quality overall crisis, which is, on the other hand, this can be created a conflict by application of these ideas, which will turn into a high usage of machines and industries to put us in a new race of high developed cities, like the high-rise race. Providing these technological services in order just to avoid as these crises will lead us to exhaust the earth and the environment more than any time. So what we need to do and be aware as architects to avoid that conflict.
Wow.
It's a little bit optimistic, but okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. We're at a real turning point. And there's competing narratives um, from many different parts of the world, and uh, we see place as a way to bring together many of these solutions. There's good, there's many aspects of technology and um, that we need applied faster. But leading with it alone is not testing whether it's actually appropriate or effective, or actually creating the demand for it to apply fast enough. If it is an effective, important solution, it's not applying it contextually. Um, so we need to lead with values of what kind of world we actually want to have, rather than allowing the solutions, even the most progressive environmental solutions, even just leading with bikes or uh, with sustainable infrastructure. It's pretty harmless, but it may actually be limiting broader purposes or potential for public space if we apply it alone blindly, and it may be preventing the deeper conversations that need to happen. So how we come out of this asking what kind of places do we want to have, again, right in front of our homes, in our downtowns. How do we reflect the best of what our values are, our local culture, our local economy is, can then help test and draw demand for investment technology solutions that can drive and support this. We need our economies and our cultures to be local again, um, to be more sustainable. The global economy, global monoculture has been an extractive one, and it creates sort of a Ponzi scheme of wealth development. It creates sort of short-term investment that also degrades the shared value of place. But how in a non-placemaking can be sort of an sometimes apolitical way of ramping people onto to new solutions and to creating new systems um, that are replicable. So I see another question.
Yeah, I was involved in. Okay, I'm reading. I was involved in placemaking Nairobi, and one of our greatest challenges was encouraging people to go on with placemaking past the placemaking week event. What suggestions do you have to encourage a very fast-moving city to slow down and actually see it is not an annual thing, but an everyday thing? Yeah.
Yeah, and so Placemaking Nairobi is a local organization, and there's been different conferences and weeks, so it's a great example. So that's wonderful. Thanks for being part of this. Um, and yeah, events can be seen as just sort of short-term solutions. Oh, we're addressing these issues with just tactical urbanism, or just a one-day event. And yes, it can perpetuate the existing system. So we have to look at placemaking as more than just the actions. It's more than just the stuff, the the beautification of public spaces, perhaps, but really, as a deeper conversation. And so a week is a great way to start. But if you're not finding experiments that can last longer, you can get co-opted, or you can lose momentum. So always connect the short-term actions to larger governance and public process placemaking efforts as well.
We have another question. Yeah, the governance issue is complicated. US has a very different system to most places in MENA, etc. There are the existing laws and regulations as well that reflect the societal norms, but may not reflect what you are advocating. Change of these is not easy. So what can newly developed communities, suburbs or ex-suburbs do to make sure they include placemaking opportunities right away? It would be great to build these opportunities at the same time as the community is being built. However, it may be difficult to prove the value of placemaking to developers.
Yeah. So there's two really good questions there. So in terms of different laws and regulations, yeah, certainly As I've said, yeah, placemaking is a different set of, it's applied differently in many parts of the world, obviously, and it comes from different challenges. And usually that reflect the strengths or limits of governance or government in that part of the world. In the U.S., in a way, actually, placemaking emerged because government wasn't doing enough. They weren't creating the security and safety in the 70s and 80s for public spaces. So in this case, a lot of business improvement districts and sort of public-private partnerships emerged to get support from the not-for-profit sector, from private developers, from property owners to contribute to what government wasn't doing. So in the U.S., it emerged as sort of supporting grassroots multi-sector engagement in a way that we think can be applied. It's been applied in parts of the world where government is very strong, because like in Australia, where it's actually doing a pretty good job, they're not getting much support from other sectors. Our general working theory is that the best placemaking is done when it's balanced between many different sectors and no one sector dominates, and draws on the creativity and resources of many. But in lower income parts of the world and more informal settlements, I think, again, we need to show how some of that is doing better placemaking than very formal parts of the world or wealthier parts of the world. So we need to not lose some of that. We can't glorify it or rely or expect these communities to do everything themselves that needs to be done. But we also need to draw from the existing assets of the great placemaking knowledge that is in these communities and the resources that are there as well, and make sure when we create new governance structures, if we do formalize these communities, that we're not losing the strong informal governance and participation that often exists in those spaces. The second question, with newly developed communities is a big one, and certainly there's a lot of new development. We've worked a lot in the Middle East a bit with new development projects, and in the private sector there, who because of the big growth there, that frankly there is a lot of the greatest learning and the biggest mistakes happening for placemaking from a private sector perspective. We do find that developers are actually often the easiest to convince. They're often doing the most damage, but we can show them fairly easily that if you lead with public spaces, that you ensure success of your project in the long term, that you limit a lot of the risks of failure. One developer we worked with says that public spaces are the new anchor tenant. If you know the public space is going to work, you know the development will work. It drives value beyond what the market can offer, because you create attachment, you create, you drive foot traffic, you make it safer, you create ownership in those spaces. So developers, there's lots of anecdotal evidence of how public spaces drive success for development. We do need more and more cases for that. But we need to work with the private sector developers that want to lead on this to show their success and help those other developers realize it. Because I agree, the developers are the dominant pattern of development is a very extractive one. It is one that perpetuates a negative land use impact and is often further creating gated communities, more privatized areas, suburbanized landscape, even with high-rise buildings. We need to show that when developers add to public realm, and when they collaborate with other private sector developers to create some kind of often informal governance or formal governance of the shared public realm between buildings, that's when they can succeed the most. That's when they drive both. They drive shared value exponentially, and they still drive private value at least at a steady rate. So getting that is really the way to have the biggest impact on this paradigm shift in this fast developing parts of the world. But the Amaken network, there's a lot of people in the network that are connected to place-led development efforts around the region. So I encourage you to connect with that. And there's a lot of efforts in Dubai, Abu Dhabi that are terrible, but also some of the best people and best learning is happening in places like there and in Egypt, and there's people from many countries that are part of the Amakin network. So what else do we have here?
Two more questions. Is it possible to reshape or transform the public space after COVID-19, or is it possible to change the ownership of public space after COVID-19? It's one question.
So yeah, that's the big question to be asking right now. There's a fear that we've sort of, again, receded into our homes and into the backs of our homes and into fear, and we've, in a sense, let the ownership of public spaces be less, when in fact we need it to be more, and so how we come out of this crisis and start to use public spaces more intentionally with more outgoing nature, even if we have to space each other out, it's very important. And in fact, the spacing issue is an opportunity for making the case for more public space, for more need for it, for widening sidewalks, for using street space, for using parking. There's places that are getting rid of their parking minimums. There's neighborhoods we're working with that they're taking on-street parking off of their main streets so people can use those spaces to walk, to put restaurant tables in. I do think restaurants are going to have a really hard time being indoors. They need to support these, really important small businesses and food culture to survive. We need to allow the restaurants, the markets, the retailers to use the sidewalks, the public streets, in ways that actually contribute to making these streets much better. It's something we needed to do anyway. So how we make streets great places again, not just and how through that process we make it more difficult to drive to them will cause people to want to and be able to walk more in their neighborhoods, support local business, local economies, local culture, slow down. We might not get the same growth of some of the global brands and global tourism in our communities, but we'll build a more authentic local identity, a local tourism, and local economies that ultimately will be more resilient and provide other types of value beyond just economic.
Okay. What's the future of public placemaking with extent to COVID pandemic is one question, which was similar to what we had. A couple of questions regarding actually people about this bottom-up approach thing. I was trying to ask the role of NGOs, especially in different cultural and political contexts, because it may not be always possible to activate people. And the other question, getting people involved can be difficult, jobs, families, etc., and they have little time to be involved in such efforts, especially in regard to our place governance initiatives. How do we get people involved when others are already struggling?
Sure. Yeah. So, NGOs will be key in many scales. From a place governance perspective, we think it is nonprofits that NGOs that need to be more involved in managing public space and placemaking and facilitating engagement at a very local level. Whether it's sort of a main street, high street organization, or a manager of a square. That money for managing, organizing, facilitating change in public spaces is some of the best money spent. And we often, we have property managers, building managers, but we don't have public space managers. And people are most likely to get engaged in the issues that are closest to their home, their business. So we need engagement at that scale. That's really key, but also obviously NGOs citywide and globally to advocate, to organize, to connect, break down disciplines, facilitate collaboration amongst sectors is how change ultimately is occurring in the examples we're seeing. It's the NGOs that lead the
Yeah.
conversation. Um, but it's always multi-sector as well.
Yeah.
And so getting people involved, people want to contribute now locally and globally. We have a broader consciousness globally. We don't have a lot of ways to contribute. People aren't asked how they can improve their public spaces. When they are, they have great ideas. So we need to give people the tools. There's many placemaking tools, engagement tools that are available. A lot of them on the Placemaking Europe website. They have a whole set of tools that are open source for engaging people in evaluating their public spaces, coming up with ways to improve them. There's trainings that Placemaking Europe's doing and other networks are doing to support capacity for engagement in public space in placemaking.
We have another question. Do you think differences and changes of public space related to COVID-19 will be temporary or permanent? And if you think they are permanent, to what extent do you expect them to be effective?
So we've always been a proponent of temporary changes as a way to learn and test and show that things can happen, because the permanent is often hard to get to happen. Yet I agree there's a threat to doing things temporarily in that they might just get taken up again. So we have to implement these short-term temporary bike lanes, temporary plazas, removal of parking in ways that enable success and are part of a larger placemaking process. And we obviously have to sustain how they're managed. But I think it's the businesses that will really drive the demand and success of these in using these spaces. And it's something that we should have done a long time ago, allowing restaurants and businesses to act more like a market, to compete, to contribute to the public space, to spill out in ways that are almost self-regulated to an extent. So I'm really excited for this, and there's a lot of cities that are changing their laws, allowing for this to happen. And there's going to be some mistakes made along the way, but how we learn about how to allow businesses to use the public realm in ways that work is a huge opportunity. And the way we've let cars privatize space, create fear, cause major death in many of our public spaces in the centers of our communities. Is limiting but yields a big opportunity for repurposing the space.
Yeah. We've got two interesting questions. One is about the terminology. Our participant says that I'm a bit skeptical about the terminology used. When we talk about peace building, it implies a bottom to up approach. Bottom to top, sorry. However, peacemaking means a top to bottom approach, usually led by the political elite, causing a catastrophe most of the time. So wouldn't it be better justified for you using the term place building rather than placemaking as a visionary initiative?
Cool. No, I like that thinking. Place. Yeah. So there's a lot of good debates around the terminology, and it's really good to keep questioning these. And the make it's the make we like making because it's sort of this maker culture. We want everyone to be a maker.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways you make a space, not just physically, not just building it. There's people who talk about place taking, place keeping, and we often think the best way to preserve a place and its values is to proactively shape it, to have a vision of what it should be. But the issue of peacemaking is really the fascinating one. One we've learned a lot about from someone named Roni Jalk from Lebanon, who has written a bunch of articles on how placemaking and peacemaking need to go together, and how it is at the grassroots level where people not only are around each other in public spaces that may have difference or may have conflict of various kinds, but how when they work together to improve a space, they bridge difference. So rather than focusing on our conflict, focusing on our shared goals and shared needs and action can often shift culture. A quick example of that is I got to do a workshop with Sudanese refugees in a part of Tel Aviv where the Sudanese refugees were seen as a real problem by the city. They were seen as loiterers. They were a real source of fear for the people that lived there, but no one had ever talked to them. No one had ever engaged them. And we did this place game exercise in the space with the city architect and a lot of government people in the city of Tel Aviv and other practitioners and academics. And we actually, part of the exercise is to ask someone in the space what they like about it and what they would do to improve it. And these refugees that were loitering in the space or could have been perceived as such actually had great ideas. They didn't want to be seen as problems. They had ideas on how the space could be improved, how they could contribute to it. They wanted to work in partnership, and they didn't want to dominate the space the way that they were being perceived to do so. So the city architect said it was the first time he'd ever talked to them, and it sort of broke down this barrier, and sort of unleash that kind of creativity. But how that applies at peace building at broader scales is a different bigger challenge. But I do think culture does change in public spaces, and when there's some places where people start to feel comfortable around each other, where they start to make eye contact, smile, trust each other a little bit more, that's really a root change to larger cultural and political shifts. So public space, we obviously there's the whole sort of Arab Spring issue, and there's a lot of interesting work and research on how public space supported and added to that in various ways. But we also think public spaces and placemaking, there's other types of democracy beyond just protest too that they support, and democratizing of the economy of culture, that allow participation and new visions to emerge that are compatible with peacemaking. So there's some articles on these topics on the PPS website, and Roni Jalk is a resource on this topic, as so many others. There was the Journal of Public Space also had a whole issue dedicated to Arab placemaking recently. Had some good articles on that topic.
And we have, I think, the last question. How would it be possible to compromise between the dictated norms for behavior of people and learned behavior of people in public realm?
So yeah, I mean, I think of placemaking as getting people to be more active participants in their world, moving from being passive consumers to of every part of our lives. And we can all only take on so much and change. We need norms and structures to sort of get by, but to make this world, be able to continue to welcome humans, we need to build all of our capacity to co-create it, to contribute to it, to shape it in ways that will enable us to continue to live here. And so it means not just being, passive to what we're told to do in spaces, but seeing our public realm as something we are creating just by being in it, and so from the very small actions, to walking down the street, smiling at people, making eye contact, to how we treat the front of our homes, to how stores add to that shared behavior, that they all put in practice into motion a virtuous cycle of positive places, and the places that have the most love, the most people adding to them, they create the most shared value. And it's really through the patterns of life, because a dead space, the most well-designed space, could still be dead if people aren't loving it and using it in a way. But it's through these in a way new norms that people can compete to conform to, that they contribute to, that create these cultures of and patterns of making these places better and better, and more unique, more of and by the people that are in them. And as people can live where they like, people are talking about moving to, they're caring more about their local values, their social relationships, more coming out of this crisis. As people can live where they like, where they can invest where they like. It's the places that are the most loved, that allow people to come and love them, to help shape them, to contribute to them, that are going to succeed most in the future. That 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 are going to create the most innovation. They're going to create the new products, the new technologies, um, the new cultural solutions and social innovations as well. So it leading with place and places that and allowing people to give love and contribute to the place is going to be the driving force of successful local economies, cultures going forward. And it's a time where out of the gates, each community needs to really think deeply about this. Do we recede into our home and just be a private community where that is no uniqueness, no attachment, or do we make our place one that people love and can contribute to, and can welcome new people to come and contribute to as well? So it's a fun process. And it's meant to, it only works if it's fun, having everyone be part of your community again. So it's a scary time. It's sad in many ways, but let's realize this opportunity to come back together much stronger, and create public spaces that reflect the values and cultures of our communities.
Yeah. We have a long comment, probably involving a question. I strongly agree to what you have stated in the beginning about spaces. A point I want to add is the same place we are currently standing in wasn't what it once was. It's always ever changing, and we will look at the so-called place we know will be looked back on, and the question will raise in an individual's mind asking, how could we have lived such primitive lives? Just as we look at ancient civilizations and ask the very same question. So place is and always will be a changing variable. So how does one predict future problems that could be avoided if we don't even know what we don't have knowledge of? Very philosophical.
Yeah. No, beautiful point. I think this point illustrates why it's particularly important that we design space to be flexible, to be managed, to be more about a platform for culture to continually evolve, express, be debated on. For those are the spaces that have been most resilient over time. The it is purpose and meaning is an individual choice in space, but the spaces that allow the biggest diversity of purpose and meaning, of individual purpose and meaning, to be layered onto it, are the ones that keep thriving and allowing change to happen. So, but then we also have to start looking at what are the types of places. We did a lot of work with Brookings Institution on an initiative on placemaking and innovation, and where they were showing how what leads to innovation, what leads to the change that you're talking about, our social, our people bumping into each other, our collaboration amongst different sectors or different companies, and a lot of the landscape of innovation is very siloed. Is going to look very, I think, will look very primitive because it's very rigid. A lot of the award-winning landscape architect designs, the most expensive architecturally designed communities are rigid. They are going to be a product of a certain time, and they are making a lot of mistakes. But I do think the districts, the neighborhoods that are the most welcoming to all, that allow people to mix, allow people to feel safe in their homes and have private space as well, but have a full spectrum of private to public, and opportunities for being around different people. Those are the ones that will produce the new solutions, the new businesses, and produce them in ways that respect and build on past wisdom, past cultures, past ideas as well. So it will be grounded in something more effective. yeah, learning what creates the ecosystems that allow for this, that are adaptive, resilient, is key. We can learn from history of what kinds of civilizations did adapt and changed, and a lot of those places are, in the Mediterranean. We can learn from a lot of these types of urbanization patterns. But we're also seeing, a lot of the biggest mistakes being made, with very expensive projects that are not going to adapt. They're of a certain time alone.
And let's say one final question: is there a direct relationship together with physical environment quality and placemaking?
So, I mean, quality can mean a range of different things. I do think, we want more investment in the public realm. We want more quality materials, more quality design. We want to draw on the expertise of the disciplines that create quality urban environments, that create, quote, good design. But I also think the focus on quality, first and foremost, has almost prevented the larger investment in it that's needed. The focus on livability and quality urban design correlates too highly with an exclusionary, consumptive, high-cost environment that's only affordable to some. And everyone deserves a quality environment. I think the way to get there is to lead more, not just with the physical environment, but with social life, with the uses and the purposes for these spaces that can then drive and inform what kinds of quality materials design is needed to support that. Saskia Sassen talks about how what's the wealth of cities is how they're incomplete, how they're porous, how they're how they allow people without power to shape them, to create them. And so again, parts of the world that are more informal, that are lower income, have this wealth, and the more rigid parts of cities that can't change as much, you may have a high quality built environment, but don't allow for this placemaking essentially as much. They don't allow themselves to be adapted as much. So we need to figure out ways, most importantly, to support the parts of the world that are not allowing people to live healthy, viable lives. And placemaking can be more and more of a tool for supporting those communities, not leading with the design intervention necessarily, or the built quality environment. So livability is often perceived as this, that to go back to that slide we started with, the future of the city. Livability. We want livability for more, but we may be able to achieve it faster, more efficiently, more affordably through a focus on lovability, through places we love, and that's not just the physical. Just with people, just as in with people, we don't just love people because of their physical embodiment. We also develop attachment because of the ways we engage with people and other values in them. It's the same with the public realm. We develop attachment because we love to be around each other, because we feel like we contribute to each other. From its many softer parts of it. So placemaking is really about drawing out the softer parts. There's sometimes actually the more, some people describe it as sort of the more feminine approaches to cities. It's more about the relationships. It's more about the openness of the more feminine form of cities, but also the process, allowing for the process to happen. So a lot of people teaching placemaking. There's a whole network of universities in Australia brought together by something called Place Agency, which is realizing that the skills for placemaking, only a small percentage of them are about the form. It's many of the skills that are needed are more about conflict resolution, about participation, about engagement, governance. There's many other. Placemaking requires the skills of many different disciplines. It doesn't negate any of these. We need all of them. But I think there's been a little bit too much attention sometimes in the assumption that it's the landscape architect, it's the physical investment alone that makes the place.
Thank you very much. It seems that we don't have any more questions. Would you like to say your last words maybe before we close the session? Stefan?
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Sebnem, for leading this and inviting me in. To get to be part of this conversation and kick off this program. I will say that the expertise for any region is locally, and the best examples are locally. I didn't go into that many examples, but I think it's really important to the people you can connect with people in the Placemaking X network and Amakan network, the European network, to get local examples and tools, and start collaborating in that way. I'm also glad to connect with anyone. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and to continue the conversation. This is about shared learning. We're all experts. Everyone knows a lot about public space and placemaking, a lot more than they often realize. So we need to draw on each other, inform each other, educate each other, create a virtuous cycle where we all get to share our love of public spaces and placemaking with each other, and encourage each other to do more of it together. So it's shifting that participation. It's allowing everybody in a community to see themselves as a placemaker, seeing as all of us as facilitators, not just experts of the knowledge, the creativity that is often quiet, that's often hidden in our communities. So I'm an honor to connect with people in Cyprus. I was in Cyprus as part of a study abroad program in 1996, and loved it and loved that whole region. And there's obviously a great wisdom and history in the built environment there that we can be a gathering place for people around in the region and around the world for this learning. So I hope to get to come to Cyprus at some point, and be part of the learning that's there. So thank you so much for hosting me virtually there. It's great to feel connected.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We would love to host you here personally one day in future. This was our intention anyway, one way or the other, but so far so good. Thank you very much for accepting to be our first speaker. And I would like to thank everyone who have joined internally and externally to our series. And please keep following us. We will have new guests in the coming weeks. And I wish you all a very healthy and safe time and day in the future.
Cheers. Thank you, Sebnem.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.